Hello everyone and welcome back to Fast.Forward.Pride podcast with myself, Alessandro, pronouns he, him, and
me, Jason Jones, an LGBT activist from Trinidad and Tobago.
Now, last time we told you we had to change the plan a little bit to respond to some of the requests from the community, but also, importantly, the fact that this demonstration happened in Soho, London, by a religious group.
Yes.
If you haven't listened to that podcast, please go back and listen to it because it's quite an interesting conversation. But I know you had something to say before we get into the new episode.
Some of the emails came in asking about what the evangelicals of North America were doing over the last 3 to 4 decades across Africa and Caribbean, spending billions of dollars to promote homosexuality in these countries. So where you're seeing recriminalization happening, for example, in Trinidad and Tobago in March this year, they recriminalized, and the evangelicals spent millions of dollars on some of the highest paid lawyers in Trinidad and Tobago to fight against me in court. So these religious organizations, mainly out of North America and the United States, are spending a lot of money fighting to support homophobia in countries in Africa and the Caribbean. And now we saw the marches on the streets of London. So please do your own investigation and find out more about it. So,
thank you, Jason. Yes.
Ageism.
Ageism was always supposed to be the kind of starting point of this conversation, or rather than ageism, intergenerational dialogue, but really to address an issue that is very prevalent in our community, the issue of age, how we as individuals and communities kind of approach age and ageism, aging, and then how that turns into ageism.
The Peter Pan syndrome that we all are aware of with gay men. Yes.
So let's start from there because, unfortunately, it's not as common to see people from two different generations to come together and discuss topics, whatever those might be. It tends to be quite homogeneous in terms of age groups when people go out. And actually, for those listening, as you hear us having this conversation, think about the 5-10 most closest people you've got
in your social circle.
Social circles, exactly. Are they all from the same age groups?
Do they all look like you?
Do they all look like you? If you're answering yes to one of those questions, probably, you're missing out on an opportunity to have meaningful conversations and to kind of step out of that comfort zone,
and
right?
we can't be preaching to the straight world about diversity and inclusion when we're not doing it in our own social network. So if your social network looks and sounds and eats and breathes like you're not practicing diversity and inclusion in your own backyard. And this is where you and I really kind of had that discourse and decided to do this podcast, because there were so many missing gaps in your historical knowledge about queerness, and me having lived for most of it. I mean, I don't think the viewers knew, but I was a child in New York, living in New York City at the Stonewall riots.
So let's start from your age. How old are you?
I'm 62. This is my 62nd year on the planet.
Wow. Yeah. And there's no filter, I have to say. This skin looks so good.
Black don't crack.
Black don't crack. But 62, so definitely, a generation that, we were talking a bit about the digital divide, but a generation that didn't use social media, that didn't use the digital kind of tools to connect and I think share your stories as well. I think
that your generation and below don't understand that LGBT history and knowledge was an oral tradition. It was passed on orally from an elder to a young person. And that was because we shared space. So the bars and clubs and all of those gathering spaces, the saunas, bathhouses, this was where intergenerational stuff happened, and the conversation and the oral tradition of passing on history, passing on knowledge happened. What happened is we had a generation of men lost to HIV/AIDS. And that generation created a missing link in that oral tradition and the history of passing on oral knowledge from one generation to the next. And then secondly, we had the digital revolution where everything moved to the phone. And so community moved onto the phone, and that space where oral tradition used to happen was taken away. So we moved from meeting in these queer-friendly spaces and then going online, or worse yet, that ageism that we saw happening online, that discriminatory stuff that happened online, where everybody became a six-pack torso and with no face and no legs, that so dehumanized us and unraveled this part of our oral tradition of passing on history and knowledge. You know, there was a culture and a language that we had, Polari, which I know you probably know, but many of our viewers may not know. We had a language. That's how important our culture was. We had systems of communicating. I don't know, you know, please Google things like the Hanky Code. Hanky Code was a way of communicating to each other as queer people. Women had their own ways of communicating to each other. So when these spaces got taken away from us by HIV/AIDS, by the digital age, by the loss of queer safe spaces, we now find ourselves in a space where people your age and under don't know who we are and where we come from, and it's become a very sexualized community, not understanding the great, rich history of queerness.
Nothing wrong with, kind of being sexual in any way, but absolutely, I think we should address the kind of point of age specifically. And I want to ask you, as an elder of our community, how do you feel within this community today? Do you feel there is ageism in the community? And
obviously there is. I'm very lucky that I come from Trinidad and Tobago, where elders are treated with a great deal of respect in the black community. So in Trinidad, for example, if I go to a gay party, everybody turns nothing. There's nothing unusual for gay male elders to be attending parties, or female queer elders to be attending parties. Europe and white culture is very ageist, not just in the queer community, but across the spectrum. I mean, you talk to women who are in theatre and performance, and they say, you know, after 40, my career is dead. You know, I become a witch, I become an evil spinster. You know, these are the options for women as they age. So, you know, this idea of age in the white global north has always been problematic, and for a lot of marginalized communities. You know, we always talk about a straight man, you know, looking more dashing and debonair as he gets older and gets salt and paper hair. But a woman is not allowed to do the same thing. So it's a much broader conversation that we should be having. And I really want everybody out there to understand this. You know, when we talk about intersectionality, there's intersectionality and discrimination. So ageism is connected to homophobia. You know, all of these things are interconnected. So when we are trying to dismantle these systems of oppression, we all need to work together. So we need to find spaces for cisgender women to be a part of this conversation. We need trans people to be a part of this conversation, to dismantle things like the gender binary and misogyny and all the rest of things that are all wrapped up in these systems of oppression. And, you know, I do think that, you know, I identify as queer now, and for many gay people my age, that word is wrapped up in so much hate and history of oppression, and it's hard for them to embrace it. I embrace it because, for me, queerness takes away the separateness of the alphabet soup. Yeah. And I think the alphabet soup served its purpose, but I think it's now we dump it. Yeah. I think we as a community need to come under one umbrella.
Yeah, I love that, and we will definitely unpack in future episodes some of the topics that you mentioned. Definitely the one on misogyny, the one on kind of femininity and toxic masculinity. But I want to pick up on two things. Well, one, a comment on the queer, you know, the terminology, because I think there's not just a digital divide, there's a language divide as well in terms of generations. Yes. And how, you know, again, older people may get offended when they hear, and not just offended, like really shaken because the word queer comes with a memory of
trauma.
Of trauma, absolutely. Yeah. So how we have to have these conversations for younger people to understand that it's important that we reclaim the word queer, but we need to do it together across generations to bring people on a journey of reclaiming that word. Yes. Because otherwise we will leave, especially kind of older generations, behind.
Well, it's exactly what you saw happen with the black community in the global north, where they reclaimed the N-word. And, you know, that was a very systematic change of empowerment for black people. And for me, that's what I saw with queer, being exactly the same thing, reclaiming a word that was meant to hurt me and create trauma, and reclaiming it as my own and saying, up yours, I'm not afraid of you anymore. So that dismantling and reclaiming things that hurt, I think, is a very powerful tool in our arsenal as queer and black people for us to really unpack not just our own personal trauma, but what we identify as a community. And that community space, which I see being built now in young queer communities, is wonderful. And, Oprah Winfrey said, forget fighting against the dinosaurs. Let them die out. You can't change a heart and a mind that's cold and black. My white grandparents were racist. I can't change that for them. They come from a generation of only understanding black and marginalized people as being othered. So if I couldn't change my grandparents, I'm not going to change anybody else. What I do see is much more listening from the younger community and much more empowerment to unpack all of this mess. A lot of my friends who are in the younger queer community are always talking about their therapy and how they are doing the internal work. That internal work is so key for all of us. And, I think that we need to listen to more of this intergenerational conversation because we both have so much to learn. And this podcast is centered on that and from that. And I hope everybody watching is also listening and thinking about how can I unpack that? Where are the elders in my life? Why are they not informing what I'm doing today and helping me to unpack the mess that they may have not been able to unpack, but at least our conversation creates a forward-thinking process of unpacking the mess.
Absolutely. And actually, you mentioned the digital divide. It's not just an issue in terms of the sort of the fact that many older people maybe are not in those spaces, but also the type of conversations that happen in the digital space tend to not be as profound, as deep, as complex as the ones we're trying to do.
And in the digital space, because people are keyboard warriors, we don't give space for grace. And, when you speak to an elder who may have a problem with that word, or you speak to somebody in their youth who may try to cancel you because of, that issue of being an elder and not understanding the new types of dialogue and engagement that's happening today, we do need to find grace for each other because we are coming from different spaces and we are meeting in the digital realm where it's easy to say, oh, cancel that person, or you're an awful person for using that word. There's no humanity in the digital space. And that grace is something that has been taken away by it all being on a keyboard. So I really want to encourage people to find grace in their engagement, whatever it may be, whether it be Snap, TikTok, wherever. Try and find your words and your engagement, at least at the end of it. Find a space for grace, and for people to just be kind to each other. We're all on a journey, and not all of us are in the same place, and not all of us have the same privileges. So we do need to find grace for each other and build that community from that space of grace.
I love that. And it's so easy to forget. It sounds simple, right? But when we are behind the screen, big or small, that grace, the kindness, the humanity, the empathy
gets thrown out the window.
Build when you are in person, when you are creating that human connection, it just isn't there, right? There's one last thing I wanted to ask you, because there's a digital divide, but there's also reality where gay clubs are closing.
Yeah, the spaces are dying out.
The spaces are dying out. So where do we meet? How can we find spaces for these conversations to happen?
Well, I'll make a call to action for this episode, which is create the space. I recently found myself homeless, and thankfully I was given a home at Tonic Housing, which is the UK's first over 55 LGBT housing. Thank you, Tonic House. And, as a 60-plus-year-old man, to face homelessness, and, that was not just homelessness out of my own fault. I was literally made homeless by my landlord, where I lived for 8 years, and flooded by the neighbor above. And if it wasn't for Tonic Housing, I don't know what situation I would be in now. And again, finding that is where the call to action is. Find a space and claim it. Let's reclaim space.
I love that, and it's a perfect place to stop. This is what we're trying to do, to reclaim spaces, to create spaces for meaningful conversations. We hope you will join us next time. In the meantime, if you've got any questions or any comments, you can leave them under the episode, or you can email us at Fast.Forward.Pride@gmail.com. Thank you once again for myself, and Jason, any final words?
Oh, just I really want to thank everybody watching.
And that's it. That's it from us. Thank you, and we'll see you at the next episode, which will be talking about masculinity.